Congratulations on the purchase of your salt-free water softener. Your new system works in two stages. First, any sediment is removed from the pre-filter. Then, any remaining hardness or particulate is neutralized. This video will walk you through the installation process. The system will consist of the following parts: the conditioner tank labeled as FS, a pre-filter housing, a sediment filter to be placed in the pre-filter housing, a gasket and lube for the pre-filter, a spanner wrench, a hose bib assembly, a mounting bracket for the pre-filter, 2 MNPT fittings, and 1 bypass valve. The system is compatible with PVC, copper, and PEX tubing. This installation video will feature a combination of PVC pipes and corrugated water connectors. 48 hours prior to the installation, the media in the tanks will need to be activated. This will be accomplished by filling the tank with water. But first, the provided bypass valve will need to be installed. There are extenders with rubber fittings that will be pressed into the openings on the tank head. Thread the 2 connectors onto the head and fully tighten them to secure the bypass valve in position. You will now install the MNPT fittings. Insert the rubberized fitting into the opening on the bypass valve and then tighten it in place. Repeat this on the other side of the bypass. Ensure that the connections are fully tightened. The hose bib adapter will now be required to soak the media inside the tank. Identify the inlet side on the softening tank and then connect the hose bib adapter to it. A garden hose that's connected to your spigot will then be connected to the hose bib adapter. Before turning on the water, ensure that the bypass is not activated. The valves on the top of the tank should be positioned as shown here. Turn on the water to the hose about halfway. Once water begins to exit the tank, the water can be turned off. Shut off the water to the hose. Disconnect the hose and then remove the hose bib adapter. Go ahead and set the tank to bypass while the media is activated. Once done, set the tank aside and allow it to soak for 48 hours. After the time has elapsed, go ahead and release the bypass. You may note that some water may exit the tank during this step. Go ahead and reconnect the hose bib adapter to the inlet side of the tank. And once again, a water hose from the spigot will be connected. Turn on the water to the hose and allow it to run for a few minutes until it begins to run clear. Disconnect the hose and then remove the hose bib adapter. You will then connect it to the opposite side of the tank, followed by the water hose. You will now run water through the tank in the opposite direction until it runs clear. The hose and the hose bib adapter can now be removed. With the carbon filter tank prepped, you can now proceed to preparing the pre-filter. Unscrew the top of the tank to remove it. Inside, you will find the gasket and the lube that's required for the next step. There is a groove indented along the top of the housing that will receive the gasket. Go ahead and lay the gasket in place. Apply some of the provided lubricant along the edge of the gasket, and then spread it out to ensure that it's evenly coated. The gasket will then be flipped over and reseated into the groove. Apply the remainder of the lubricant and once again spread it out to ensure that it's evenly coated. The provided sediment filter will now be installed. It has an opening that will rest upon a nipple that's on the inside of the pre-housing. Drop the sediment filter into the housing and then make sure that it sits flush. It should sit just below the surface. The lid of the housing has guides that will ensure that the sediment filter properly aligns when you put it back on. Go ahead and replace the lid and then fully tighten it onto the pre-filter housing. PVC nipples will now be installed on the in and the outlet on the top of the housing. To ensure that there are no leaks, plumber's tape will need to be applied to the threads on the PVC nipples before you install them. Thread the PVC nipple in place and fully tighten by hand as tight as possible. Repeat these steps on the opposite side. A pipe wrench or a pair of pliers will now be required to fully tighten the PVC nipples into the housing. The final step in prepping the pre-filter housing is to apply some more plumber's tape onto the threads on the other ends of the PVC nipples. Your pre-filter will now be mounted using the provided bracket. Due to the weight, you will need to mount the bracket to a stud. Once you identify the optimal location, go ahead and mark out the holes to be pre-drilled. A 3/16 drill bit can then be used to pre-drill the holes for the mounting bracket. Locate the bag of the provided bolts and washers, and then use a 1/2-inch socket to secure the bracket to the wall. Before mounting the pre-filter to the bracket, take a look at the top to identify the inlet and outlet direction of the water to ensure that it's being properly oriented. It will then be secured to the bracket with 4 of the provided bolts. The next steps of this installation will have you tap into the Pre-Plumb. Please be sure to shut off the water to the home before performing these steps. Also note that it's a recommendation to install a bypass ahead of the system to allow for easy maintenance. Expose the Pre-Plumb and then install a connector with a 1-inch threaded adapter. You will need a threaded adapter on the other side of the Pre-Plumb as well. Apply plumber's tape to the threaded adapter on the incoming water supply that's leading towards the pre-filter. The 1-inch PVC shutoff valve will now be connected to that adapter. Fully tighten it in position to ensure that there is no leaks. Apply plumber's tape to one end of the third PVC nipple, and then thread it onto the other end of the shutoff valve. It will also need to be fully tightened to ensure that there is no leaks. Apply plumber's tape to the other side of the PVC nipple. One of the corrugated pipes will now be threaded onto the PVC nipple and fully tightened by hand. It will then be fully tightened to ensure that it doesn't leak. The incoming water supply will now need to connect to the inlet side on the pre-filter housing. Also ensure that the connection is fully seated. The softening tank will now be introduced. And note that the connections on the tank will both need to be wrapped with plumber's tape. Position the tank so that the connectors are facing towards the back. A corrugated pipe will now be connected to the outlet port on the pre-filter housing. That pipe will need to lead to the inlet on the softening tank. Tighten the connection by hand, and then fully tighten the connections to ensure that there is no leaks. A corrugated hose will now be connected to the opposite end of the Pre-Plumb. It will need to be connected onto the outlet side of the softening tank. Be sure that you fully tighten this connection as well. Your system should look similar to this after it's been fully connected. Before you can move on to test your system, use a provided spanner wrench to fully tighten the pre-filter housing to ensure there are no leaks. There is an opening on the mount for you to easily store it. You are now ready to test your system. While the water is still turned off to the home, turn on the cold water all the way in one of the bathtubs. Ensure the shutoff valve to the system is in the off position, and also ensure that the softening tank is set to bypass. Turn on the water main to the home and inspect your shutoff valve for any leaks. If no leaks are detected, open the valve and allow water to flow back into the home. Allow the system to run and inspect the system for any leaks. If no leaks are detected, go ahead and turn off the bypass to the softening tank. Allow water to flush through the system for about 5 to 10 minutes. Also note that it's common to see a small amount of sediment during this time. Congratulations! The installation is now complete.